The tensions between the NBA and China are not going away. Yesterday, President Donald Trump himself chimed in, seizing the opportunity to criticize Steve Kerr and Greg Popovich's lack of comment regarding protests in Hong Kong. Of Steve Kerr, Trump said, "He was like a little boy. He was so scared to be even answering the question. He couldn't answer the question. He was shaking." Then Trump continued on to say, "I watched the way that Kerr and Popovich and some of the others were pandering to China, and yet to our own country, it's like they don't respect it. It's very sad." All right, in light of this, guys, should NBA stars remain silent on issues going on between China and the NBA? Max?
No, they shouldn't. And by the way, Popovich didn't. Not for the first time. What Trump said was disconnected from reality, but not just disconnected, it was the opposite of reality. What Popovich said was he supported Adam Silver and thought it was very strong that Adam Silver stood up for freedom of speech, for freedom of expression, which, I mean, the Chinese government released a statement that said they literally don't understand what that means. It doesn't extend to discussing sovereign nations and national security and things like that. Yes, it does. That's freedom of expression. It certainly does. And Popovich stood up for that and stood up for Silver and commented positively about the United States and negatively about China. Now, Steve Kerr didn't make a comment. And I suspect the reason that Kerr didn't make a comment and that Popovich was careful in his phrasing is that our guys are over there right now. If you have players and members of your league, community, business in a repressive communist nation state, you will be careful with your phrasing, certainly until they are back. And it doesn't even necessarily have only to do with business interests. So I thought Steve Kerr was actually being responsible. That said, Stephen A., once the guys come back, and I think that's a very good idea sooner than later, then I would say that players who feel that they want to make a comment about what's going on should. Again, what Morey said and what Popovich said and the kind of comment that shouldn't hurt the NBA, the general comment is we think freedom is good and repression, government repression is bad. And that should be uncontroversial worldwide. And one more note, Stephen A., notice who needs who more? In terms of the business, the NBA certainly would like the Chinese market. Most businesses in the world would and do and pursue it. But the NBA has a product that the Chinese population is crazy about. So much has been written and said about it, and people were still showing up to watch LeBron James, weren't they? They were wearing masks, some of them, to hide their identities. Why would you have to do that? Because they're not free. But nevertheless, they show up to watch him because there's intrinsic value in the NBA in China, and it cuts both ways.
They show up to watch him play, not to watch him speak. And what I would say to you is that I am not a proponent of the players speaking up on this particular issue. It's a geopolitical issue. It extends far beyond their lane. I'm not questioning their competence. I'm certainly not questioning their intelligence. I'm saying considering the potential international ramifications, the global ramifications that this entails, I think players need to be very, very concerned about putting themselves in a line of fire where they could be held accountable or culpable for stuff that doesn't even concern them. Let's remember where all of this started. This started because of a tweet from an executive for the Houston Rockets. His owner immediately denounced, not what he said, but him choosing to be the one to say such a thing, thereby immediately disassociating him from the Rockets organization he represents and works for, and as well as the National Basketball Association. Tillman Fertitta, the owner for the Rockets, specifically stated, "We are not a political organization." Adam Silver ultimately got involved. He's meeting with heads of states, things of that nature. Games have been canceled, postponed. Stuff that was supposed to be televised suddenly is not televised. Not to mention the fact that with all of this stuff going on, now we've got the president involved and using it as an opportunity to get back at two individuals who are coaches, championship coaches on the NBA level, and Steve Kerr and Greg Popovich, solely for the reason that they have attacked him in the past. Now, do I think Popovich and Steve Kerr need to speak? Yes. Why do I feel that way? I feel they specifically need to speak and react directly to Trump's assertion that they have spoken against their country. They've done no such thing. They've spoken against him. And I think it's important that Popovich and Kerr make sure to illuminate the difference in what they said and the rhetoric he's trying to attach to them, because now he's getting into an issue. If you really listen to what he's saying, he's literally trying to attack the patriotism of Greg Popovich, for crying out loud, and Steve Kerr. And so when you look at it from
West
that perspective,
Point Greg Popovich,
right? Who served time
that's
for
right.
the country.
That's right. So, exactly. So what I'm saying is, think about that. So it's important that they respond and make sure that they remind America they've never talked or denounced negatively about this country. They've spoken negatively about him. And so considering how dicey the situation is and how every little word can be dissected, misconstrued, misinterpreted, and what have you, especially since this is an issue that does not involve the players, I sit up there and say, no, don't say anything. Not to mention this, Max. Hold on, Max.
Yep.
Not to mention this. Let's also remember that the players could potentially be called on the carpet for having their hands dirty because, again, my position has always been, since this incident took place, if somebody asks you, do you support the protesters, it's a very simple answer. I'm an American citizen. I support democracy everywhere, period. And you leave it at that. When you go beyond that, now people get into your personal business. And if you have been doing business with China as an individual, if you have been doing business with China as a team, as a franchise, et cetera, then whatever iniquities you believe they're engaging in, one can simply ask, didn't you know about this before when you were doing business with them? It's not a situation the players need to be in. We have leaders for a reason. Fall back and let them lead.
Well,
right
Stephen
now.
A., I disagree with that sentiment. Like that we have leaders for a reason, fall back. If someone has a strong feeling about it, an American
By the way,
citizen
Popovich
has a
was the
strong
Air
feeling
Force
about
Academy.
it.
It wasn't West Point. It was Popovich's, Air Force Academy. But go ahead.
Anyway, my point is this. If what you mean is they shouldn't get into the details of Hong Kong, okay.
Right.
I understand if the NBA is like, hey, guys, this is a complicated issue involving the British and okay, fine. I get it, you know. And also sovereignty and all. I get it. Stay away from that, guys.
Correct. That's what I'm saying.
If the thrust of what they're saying is constantly as simple as we believe people should be free. We don't believe in repression from governments, right? We don't, and oppression. That is a very clear message that Americans, particularly Americans with platforms, should not be scared to say, and there is actually an environment of fear around the world criticizing the communist Chinese government because they have such enormous business influence. So what I'm saying is, you're right about you might be right about the specific issue of Hong Kong because it can get very bogged down in details. But if simply LeBron James and others were to say, we support freedom, I think that would be a good thing.
Max, I got to jump in here then, because I think it's one thing to have a platform and speak up, but it's also to have a platform and use it responsibly. Are you then saying that the NBA, a basketball league, has a responsibility to speak up on this issue?
I think if they're doing business in China and this rears its head, which it inevitably will if you're doing business there, then at that point, yes, I think you have a responsibility to make it very clear where you stand and what values. Remember, I said on this show several times, you weren't hosting those days, the U.S.-Chinese relationship is, and even in the NBA in China, it's based on mutual interest, not mutual values.
Right.
And so from time to time, the values issue pops its head up, and it needs to be addressed.
But But Max, it has been addressed. Like, for example, James Harden, you're clamoring for LeBron James. Why are people clamoring for LeBron James? They don't just want to ask him about this issue and leave it to a generic point like you're just making. And I don't disagree with you on that point. You know, I'm just talking about not getting into the weeds of the whole China-Hong Kong situation.
Sure.
I'm simply saying, they're not going to leave it at that. They're going to ask LeBron for specifics. They're going to pepper him and others with questions. And then ultimately, you know this, Roz, they're going to address where his business interest lies, because LeBron James has business interests all over the place. And you know, doing business with China is one of those things. And to get back to Trump, and to get back to Trump, and that's what I'm saying, it's a very dicey and dangerous situation. And then to get back to Trump, remember, what Trump is doing with Popovich and Kerr is the same thing he did with the whole Colin Kaepernick situation.
Yeah.
He hijacked the issue and tried to turn it into a situation involving patriotism when it had nothing to do with it. Kerr and Popovich have never attacked this nation. They were undressing him. And he's saying, notice his words, how they speak against our country. They did not speak against the United States. They spoke against Trump. And that's what they need to make sure to highlight. They cannot leave this silent, because if they do that, I'm telling you right now, it's going to be a problem.
Excellent point, Stephen A. Make sure to keep your eyes out on how different parties use this situation for their own agendas as that happens. I think the underlying foundation question here is, does the NBA have a responsibility to speak up on it? And there are many sides to the discussion. All right, let's take a break here. We have more on First Take. Damian Woody joins the debate desk to tell us if the Rams are a threat to the 49ers' unbeaten season.